Hi, this is Dodger, and you're watching my show.
Three, two, one, ready, go.
So yesterday they opened up a pop-up shop, which I had never heard of pop-up shops until I moved to LA. It's basically just like a tiny shop that opens up in another shop for a very short period of time. It's all like Pokemon themed, so it's been called the Pokemon Boutique, and I got a new Omo Cat shirt, and I'm so jazzed. I don't know how long it's gonna be there, but it's at Japan LA on Melrose, so if you're in the area and you get to check that out, there's some pretty cool stuff there. Lots of different designers are involved, so. If you're somebody who is super on board for the Steam Machine thing, you can pre-order the controller, the Steam Link, and the Steam Machine together and get it like a month before everyone else. So Steam Controller, pretty self-explanatory what that is. I still have yet to touch one, but I hear that it's pretty aight, and they're still working on how you can use it as like a keyboard and things like that, so that'll be interesting. The Steam Link it's basically like a little thing intended to make it so that you can stream stuff from your PC to a TV, like anywhere in the house. I think that's the idea. And then finally the Steam Machine, which is just like, it's a game console, but for Steam games. I'm still in the camp of not really knowing where all of this is going, like whether or not it's going to be successful, but if it is, fantastic. And if you are somebody who believes in the cause, who really sees it going somewhere, yeah, you can get it by October 16th, which is a full month before other people are going to be able to get them, specifically the controller. So yeah, enjoy your Steam stuff. Speaking of Steam, they have revamped their entire refund policy and are now offering no questions asked refunds to people. Now you have to have applied for the refund within either 2 hours of game time or 14 days, 2 weeks. 2 weeks of like owning the game, not playing the game. That would make no sense. Those two things they wouldn't work together. So say you've almost owned the game for 2 weeks and you're not really thinking that you're actually gonna play it, or maybe you bought it and you were like, I've thought better of this. I have buyer's remorse. You can apply for a refund. They have said that they're going to keep a very close eye on possible abuse of the system, in which case they will revoke your ability to ever get refunds. Ways that you could abuse the system. Always playing a game for under 2 hours and then immediately getting a refund every time. Things like that might seem a little bit sketchball. I'm wondering how it works with a game that is less than 2 hours anyway. Like, I assume that the same thing would not apply to that game, but who knows? Or like, say that you're somebody who has a show along the lines of first 15 minutes of game, right? That's a show. So like, say that they started buying games, playing the first 15 minutes of them, and then getting refunds. Like just getting a refund on every game that they used on that show. That would absolutely count as abuse. But since the whole thing is automated, like it's a system where you say, I want a refund. Why do you want a refund? And it gives you lots of options. And you're like, I want a refund because of this. And it's like, cool. Any other things? You're like, maybe, and then you get your refund, right? Within a certain period of time. It'll take a bit of close observation from an actual human being in order to make sure that it's working properly. Not pointing at myself because I want that job. I do not want that job. Just throwing it out there. I am not the person. So on one hand, yay, Steam is finally, catching up with the rest of the business world and offering a proper refund policy. And on the other side, yes, they're saying that they're going to try to make it so that people who abuse it are not allowed to use it, but whether or not they're going to be able to actually notice those things very easily is questionable. There's a Kickstarter out right now for a game called Perception. It's a game where you are blind and you have to kind of tap your cane around in order to see the area in front of you. It's intended to be a horror game, but a small indie studio found it horrific for a completely different reason. So a small indie studio called Tiny Bull had been making a game called Blind for the last year and a half. And the concept is almost identical. Both are intended to be sort of creepy games. Blind, I guess, is supposed to be more of a puzzly game, whereas Perception is more of a stay away from the creatures in the dark sort of game. But the mechanics of both are very similar, and Perception is being made by some pretty high-profile people. Perception is being made by the people who made BioShock and Dead Space, and Blind is being made by a tiny company that not a lot of people know about, so they went into full-on panic mode. Like, what do we do? It's interesting because we do exist in a space where we look at games and we can immediately equate them to other games, right? You play a game and you're like, oh, I see elements of Call of Duty here, but there are also, you know, the art style is reminding me of Journey, and like, you know, you just always wind up pulling from past knowledge. And every now and then a game really does just seem like it's an identical game to something else that you've played. You're like, there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, the differences here are not very great. But for a concept that hasn't really been explored very much, like what do you do with a protagonist who is blind, who is in sort of a terrifying situation? For two different studios, one with people who are very well known and one with people who are maybe not so well known, how do you navigate that? Like that whole idea of we are making basically the same game, and not intentionally at all. Like neither of us borrowed from one another. You know, one game has been worked on for quite a while. One game was literally just announced on Kickstarter. It's like, what do you do there? So I guess at first the people at Tiny Bowl were like, pack it in, I guess. Like, cool, good job on that last year and a half. Let's go home, I guess. But I'm really, really glad to see they didn't stick with that sort of an outlook. They decided, you know what, we do have enough differences. Our game, again, is more of a puzzle game. Their game is not. You know, there are some differences there, and there's always space for different takes on the same idea. So they are going to continue making the game, which I'm so glad about. I would love to play both. Like, both games sound very interesting. I would love to see what both groups do with that sort of a concept. Now, is there an assumption there that one game is going to do better than the other? I mean, most likely. But that doesn't mean that those two games shouldn't both exist and shouldn't both have the same amount of love poured into them. And who knows, just because one game has some pretty big names behind it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be a better game. We don't know that for sure. But yes, from me to you, Tiny Bull, I'm very excited for you to make your game. I would love to play it. I will also play Perception, but I would love to play Blind when it comes out. Some of you have been following this whole story about the Think Geek acquisition. For a while there, they were talking about being bought by Hot Topic, but then we're like, you know what, never mind, we're gonna be bought by GameStop, which was very strange. They had everything in place to be bought by Hot Topic. They had signed contracts, everything. And then GameStop came to them with a better deal, like way more money. So they decided to cancel. Like, they had to pay a huge fee to Hot Topic saying, sorry, lol, here you go. As per our contract, here's the cancellation fee for you acquiring us. But I don't really find this surprising that GameStop would buy them, and here's why. The last time that I went into a GameStop, I was sort of taken aback by how many things in there were not games. And what I mean by that is, it looked like elements of Think Geek were sort of existing inside of GameStop. There were plushies, there were socks, there were toys, you know, things that weren't necessarily in line with what has ever been at their retail stores.
Hi, what you doing? What you doing, Sherlock?
He was burrowing himself in the blanket earlier, and it was very strange. He was like putting his head in the blankie and then was like licking his paws, but would just sit there with his head under the blankie, and I was like, what are you doing? And a few years ago, we were talking a lot about comic book stores, how a lot of those were shutting down, and really the only way to stay relevant was to create variation, right? To become not just a comic book store, but also a place for art classes, or a place for, you know, once a week D&D stuff, or, you know, a lot of the same things that we've seen stores like Meltdown do, where they incorporate so many other things, comedy shows, all sorts of stuff. And I feel like now the discussion has been, wow, a lot of retail game stores are starting to shut down because people, for the most part, just buy digital games or they buy their games on Amazon. And the concept is still the same. The concept of you've got to create variation, you have to create a pull. Like, why are people coming to your store when it would be so much easier to just go online and buy a thing, right? You would come to the store because there's a lot of variety there. There's a lot of different things that they could acquire in one foul swoop. So for them to buy Think Geek, I think is really smart because they can start incorporating those things in their retail market and create kind of more of a pull, I suppose. So yeah, original deal was $122 million with Hot Topic, and now they're getting $140 million out of it. Although I'm very curious to know what the cancel fee is. Like, what's the kill fee for Hot Topic? Did they basically spend the rest of the millions that they got from GameStop paying off Hot Topic and being like, here you go, Sorry about all that. A big rumor this week has been about Dark Souls 3. There's all sorts of posts being like, oh yeah, I hear that you're gonna be able to have up to 4 players and you can create your own bonfires and it's gonna be coming out in 2016, etc, etc. Like lots of information to the point where one could say maybe too many details, too many details to try and make the rumor seem legit. But we've also got a few different YouTubers saying, oh yeah, we've also got screenshots. We got some screenshots of Dark Souls 3, so yeah, it's for totally. Now, fortunately, E3 is like right around the corner, and one of the big elements of this rumor is it's gonna be revealed at E3. They're gonna talk about it at E3. So, if it's true, if it's for rolls, then we will find out about it at E3, most likely. I will be sort of disappointed if it turns out that Dark Souls 3 is coming out so quickly after Dark Souls 2, because, man, like, out of all of the series, right? Out of all of the series in the world, for them to feel sort of milky, we've been getting DLC for Dark Souls 2. The DLC has been great, but for them to already be putting out a Dark Souls 3, it's too early, I feel like. Hardcore Demon Souls and Dark Souls fans were not quite as happy with Dark Souls 2. And I think if Dark Souls 3 came out and felt sort of slapped together, like didn't feel like it had the same sort of love put into the lore and the monsters, if the world didn't feel developed in the way that they need out of that sort of a game, it could possibly kill the franchise in a way. Assassin's Creed, at least, like, nobody ever really took it that seriously, Like, people loved it, but it never felt like you had this sort of secret with the game. That's like an element of those games that's so very specific to it, where you play the game and you feel like once something clicks for you in terms of the story, it's like you unlocked something, right? Like you became part of it. You're invested now because things are starting to come together. You're starting to piece things together and figure out who did what and what happened in this world and all of these things. A lot of the same things that people found in Bloodborne, even if people were sort of disappointed in Bloodborne as a game in general in terms of difficulty. You still had that lore element to it, right? Where you had to piece things together. And if Dark Souls 3 came out and things felt like, say that they put too many cutscenes in there, right? Something as simple as that could make people go, what is this? What's going on here? But what do I know? Maybe the game's gonna come out and it's gonna be beautiful and wonderful and no problems whatsoever. But if it came out and it felt sort of slapped, if it felt a little bit slapdick, maybe could have really bad repercussions on the franchise in general, I think. And finally, of course, we've got to talk about Fallout 4. Oh man. The last few years have been just riddled with all sorts of rumors about Fallout 4, all sorts of things just getting our hopes up and then just throwing them on the ground. And it got to the point where I think a lot of people were saying, all right, this game is obviously not coming out, right? There have been too many rumors, there's been too much just stuff coming out trying to convince us that it's coming out. I'm just gonna take the standpoint of it's not happening. It's never happening. So, we did get a trailer. We actually saw more of Fallout than I was expecting. We saw sort of an establishment of the world. We saw perhaps dog meat in the trailer. We saw the actual Fallout world. We saw the vault that's going to be pretty heavily involved in this game, I would assume. Now, the thing that has been the best since it came out is the rumors. Like, before it was rumors of the game coming out, and now it's rumors of how the game is going to be put together and the story and just all sorts of conspiracy theories. Oh my gosh, they're delicious. Now, one thing that you can possibly infer from the trailer is that you have an established protagonist, which would be a very new thing for this series. You have a protagonist who speaks, who possibly has full voice acting, who has a story. Like, it's not a representation of you, right? It's like a person in the midst of something. Now, I think you should absolutely go and look up the sort of theories that people are coming up with. Like, there's robot theories, like maybe you're actually just a robot who has had memories and stuff put into you, and that's what that vault was for. Maybe that vault was like a cryogenic freeze sort of a thing, and like you are the guy who's in the past before the Fallout, and like all this stuff. Oh man, Maybe there's alien tech involved, you know, because otherwise why wouldn't we already know how to cryogenically freeze people? All sorts of stuff, like so many things. But for people who played a lot of Fallout, you got a lot of good imagery out of that trailer, I think. If you pay attention, there are so many things in that trailer that are established parts of that world. And you'll be able to look at them and be like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, I know what that is, you know? So that sort of a feeling, I think, is really going to grab people who loved the series before. And I think a lot of the hype around the series in general is going to bring new people in, for sure. Still wondering what's going to be going on with the pro tag. Or maybe even, like, we don't know that the guy in the trailer is who we play. Like, we don't know that for sure. Maybe you play the dog. I don't know. It's a Fallout game. It could be anything. Anywho, that is my show. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a positive or a negative response, feel free to leave it in my comment section. And if you would like to have coffee with me, the show will be coming back in July, so feel free to keep that jumbling around in your brain stuff. And I'll see you guys next week. Okay? Bye-bye. Mwah. Enjoy your Steam stuff.